This is the scene that honestly, my jaw was on the floor when I read this because I had not expected the book to go here. Hello, thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about the Stephen King book Needful Things, which was published in 1991. And by the way, this was released in my birth year, but Stephen King specifically mentions my exact birthday in this book. So there's like a handful of dates mentioned. And yeah, one of them happens to be my birthday, which I thought was pretty cool. So if Stephen King has mentioned your exact birth date in one of his books, comment down below, because like, what are the odds? That just seems so crazy to me and so cool. But anyway, the movie came out in 1993 and is directed by Fraser Clark Heston. So this had a theatrical release, which was 2 hours long, but thanks to Forgotten Cinema podcast, they made me aware that there is an extended version because they had a 3-hour cut that they released on TV. So that is the version I watched. I have no idea what the 2-hour one is like. I can make my guesses as to what I think they probably cut. But yeah, I did watch the extended version of this one. And the reason I am covering this is because it won a book versus movie poll that I posted last month. So thank you all for voting. This also has been mentioned a number of times in comments in past Stephen King videos. So this definitely seems to be a popular one, and I am happy to finally have read it. I covered Salem's Lot last year, and that definitely, like Salem's Lot has a strange supernatural person opening up an antique shop in a small town, and that is what we have in Needful Things as well. So it definitely, without having read any of the inspiration King had for this book, I would assume he took this idea of, the Barlow Antique Shop in Salem's Lot and kind of just put a brand new spin on that premise. And yeah, I thought this book was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. So if you have not yet read it and you are a fan of King, I would recommend it. If you have never read Stephen King, I don't think I would suggest starting with this book because honestly, as much as I liked it, it was kind of insane at times. Like the places this went, I think it's one of the most unhinged Stephen King books I have ever read. And Stephen King books can get pretty wild, so I feel like that's saying a lot. But it would also just be so unexpected because this book, I feel like it has a lot of humor, a lot of dark humor, granted, but still it's very funny at times. And yet, 1 minute it's funny and the next minute it talks about something that is so serious. And so the tone was kind of odd at times, perhaps. But yeah, it's covering such dark things and there's so much violence, and yet it also has so much humor to it as well. But yeah, there is one moment in particular that totally shocked me. So anyway, because this book is just so wild, I almost think you should read some of his other books before reading Needful Things, personally. But let me know your thoughts on that down below in the comments. And from here on out, I will now get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So in both, we have Leland Gaunt, a man who opens up a shop in Castle Rock called Needful Things. And we learn through the course of the story that he is some sort of supernatural entity that has been alive for hundreds of years, and he barters with people, or dickers as he calls it in the book, selling them an item he knows they want very, very badly, and he convinces them that this want is actually a need and they have to have this thing, and it becomes the most important thing in the world. And so because he gets them to feel this way, he is able to get them to agree to do things in exchange for getting this item. And of this in the book, later on, a character named Polly, she says, "What's the one thing in all the world, the one useless thing that you want so badly that you get it mixed up with needing it? That's your charm, Alan. That's what he's put around your neck." And in the book, he also puts them under a trance. And so, yeah, they're also in a trance while they are talking to him. And while they are under a trance, he also will be such a jerk to them. And he's beyond rude. And yet they don't fully process what he is saying, or they're not fully there. And so, of course, they're not getting upset and storming out when he says these things because he has them in his power. But he has each person play a prank on someone else in town because Gaunt already knows the town drama. And so through these pranks, he is able to fan the flames of the tensions that already exist. And his presence also encourages anger and violence, making them more willing to go to these extreme violent lengths. And there is one story in particular that is unique to the book. I mean, this story is in the movie, but this detail I'm mentioning was not in the movie. But we have a bartender who thinks that one of his customers has ruined his car. And so he is grabbing his gun, getting ready to go over there and shoot the guy, when one of the guys who works at the bar is like, hey, like, calm down, like, have a drink. And so after interacting with this coworker and talking and having a drink, he comes out of that haze and he's like, wow, like, I can't believe I was so upset that I was about to take my gun over to that guy's house. And he's kind of like, wow, like, that was crazy. But I like how we see that because he stopped for a minute. And also the act of kindness by this coworker, like being like, hey, like, let's stop and have a drink and, just talk for a minute. And so the kindness from this man, as well as him just taking a beat, it makes him come out of this haze. But most of the characters don't have someone like this for them. And so it just keeps the momentum going and they resort to these horrible, violent acts. But in the end, Gaunt, he is providing his quote-unquote customers with guns so that they can kill the person they think has been targeting them, when really Gaunt has been orchestrating the whole thing. And then he also has a couple of stooges plant explosives around town, so his ultimate goal is to burn the town to the ground and leave with their souls, which the soul aspect is unique to the book that is not mentioned in the movie. But in the end, Gaunt, he takes things pretty far. In the cover of this book, it does say the last Castle Rock story. So Castle Rock is nearly destroyed in its entirety, but he doesn't fully complete this goal because he is stopped. However, he cannot be killed. And so he does get away in the end. And in the end of the book, he has this magical car he drives. We see the car in the movie as well, but in the movie it's a Mercedes, whereas in the book it's a Tucker Talisman. I don't even know, is Tucker a real brand? I've never heard of that. But in the movie it also starts out with this insane car chase between him and the sheriff. However, that was not in the book. But he does have a magical car in the book, and in the end, he drives away in it, and the car turns into a horse. And then from there, it turns into a horse and wagon, because we hear how, back in the day, right, he's been around for hundreds of years, and he was one of those traveling salesmen, right, with his horse and cart. And so that is what it turns into in the end. And on the back of it, it says caveat emptor, which means let the buyer beware. And at first, as this was turning into the horse, I thought it was a connection to one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Because Gaunt is there, sowing violence and chaos and all of this. And so I thought that that's what this was a reference to. But then it turns into this whole medicine wagon olden day thing. So he was just going back to what he was originally. And something I loved about the book is that the items people buy, when they see it as being something incredible. And yet, when other people see it, it actually is super trashy and it's just garbage, really. And the kid, Brian, he gets a baseball card that's signed and it's a famous baseball player. But then the card we see is actually some random ball player that doesn't even matter. And some of them coming out of the trance, they will see the item for what it really is. However, the movie does not keep this the same. And the items look in reality the way the people saw them, which was disappointing. I loved the thought of them having this trashy item that they treasure so much, right? And it's sad being wow, just further showing the way Gaunt has manipulated and tricked them, right? Over literally nothing, a piece of garbage. And so I wish the movie had kept this the same. One guy has this fancy fishing rod, but then at one point when he sees the truth, he sees it's just a stick with a string, basically, or something. And so, yeah, I really liked that part of the book. But also in the book, each person, they love this item and they're so obsessed with it and it becomes the center of their universe. And yet they don't tell anybody about it. And in part, they want to keep it a secret out of selfishness because they're I don't want anyone knowing, this is all mine. I don't want to share it. It's, I want to keep it to myself. But also if this represents the darkest part of humanity, the darkest things within these people, it makes sense that they keep it to themselves. And it also made me think of the phrase, you're only as sick as your secrets, right? And a lot of these people are incredibly sick in one way or another. And in the movie, we see Brian, the boy, try to commit suicide. And in the book, we read about how after they have done Gaunt's bidding, multiple characters are on the verge of killing themselves. However, in some cases, like with Brian early on and then Keeton, Gaunt steps in because he does not want to lose them until he is done using them. So yeah, he's not stopping them from killing themselves because he cares. He's stopping them because he's like, I still need you, so you can do this later, just not right now. But in the book, Brian, so he is like 11 years old. He is in the garage getting ready to shoot himself when his little brother walks in, and he tells his brother like, oh, don't go to the new store. Gaunt is a poison man and he sells poison or something. And then he shoots himself and he dies. And this is the scene that honestly, my jaw was on the floor when I read this because I had not expected the book to go here. Like we see him earlier contemplating suicide, but then he doesn't do it and Gaunt stops him. And that in itself was dark enough. But then the fact that later on he actually goes through with it, like, again, this book, it could be darkly funny. And so for it to suddenly have something so serious and heavy take place, yeah, I was honestly shocked that this happened. And the fact that his little brother witnesses it, like, geez, like, that's some heavy stuff right there. But in the movie, they changed this because instead, Brian, he has a gun and he is going to shoot himself. But Alan is right there, the town sheriff, who I will be getting to. And so he stops Brian from killing himself. But in the movie, Brian tells Alan, like, oh, Gaunt is a poison man and he's evil. Whereas in the book, Alan had gone to go see Brian's little brother, and Brian's little brother tells Alan what Brian had said. And this happens near the end of the book. And so after Alan hears this about Gaunt, he then goes straight to Needful Things to confront Gaunt. However, in the movie, this happens like, I don't know, like still like maybe 2/3 of the way in. And Alan does not go straight to Gaunt. Like you just heard that he is the source of all of this. So why are you dilly-dallying? Like go straight to Needful Things. What are you waiting for? And in the movie, Brian's mom, she isn't paying any attention to him because she has this Elvis figurehead and sunglasses that she is obsessed with. Whereas in the book, his mom just had the sunglasses, and whenever she wore them, she would have these intense fantasies about Elvis. And another woman in town has his framed image of Elvis. So she is doing the same thing, and all either of them care about are being alone with this item that reminds them of Elvis and touching themselves. But a funny moment in the book is when Brian's mom has her glasses on and she goes into her fantasy. However, in her fantasy, she walks in on this other lady having sex with Elvis, this lady in town who she knows. And so she walks in and she's like, what are you doing? And the lady is like, well, I'm sure not vacuuming the floor. And then she tells Brian's mom to scram. And she's like, we're busy, aren't we, Elvis? And Elvis replies saying, that's right, sweet thing, just as busy as two twiddly bugs in a carpet. And so that's just an example of the humor in this book. And it was just so ridiculous. But from here, Brian's mom goes over to this lady's house and they end up shooting each other. So again, like there is so much violence in this book, and yet in some instances, like right here, it's something funny that leads to the violence. And so yeah, just a lot of dark humor. At least that's how I interpreted it, was being darkly funny. You can let me know if you felt differently. But yeah, you have these moments that are so over the top, it's hard to take serious. And yet you then have other moments that are so serious, like a child committing suicide. But it's also really sad because Brian's mom, she is in such a daze and she's just so obsessed with her Elvis sunglasses that she doesn't even realize what is going on with Brian. And once he dies and her son is in the hospital because of the trauma, she doesn't even realize what is happening. Like they're telling her like Brian is dead. And she's just like, just shut up. I don't care about Brian. Just do whatever you have to. I just want to go back upstairs. And so it's so sad to see her so checked out and not even realize what is happening with her own kids. And I wanted to share a quote from earlier. So the first time Brian contemplates suicide, but he doesn't actually go through with it, we read, she danced. With the sunglasses she had purchased in Needful Things masking her eyes, she danced. She danced at Graceland while her son crept back upstairs and lay down on his bed and looked at the narrow face of Sandy Koufax and thought about alibis and shotguns. And this made me think of It, because we see how in It, Pennywise will put the adults in a trance of sorts, or not, just specific adults. When It is trying to achieve something, he will make the adults like checked out and not pay attention to what is happening. That way it can do what it wants to. And speaking of It, there is another aspect to the book in particular that also reminded me of It. So Alan the sheriff, he is into magic tricks, and he also has this joke can that's like a can of nuts, but then when you open it, like a paper snake comes out. But when he has a showdown with Gaunt near the end, he believes that these things can be real, and so they become real. And he, opens the can, and a real snake comes out and bites and injures Gaunt. And then he has this like magic flowers he pulls out from under his watch, and he pulls those out, and they become like this powerful light or something that helps battle Gaunt. And so this obviously is very similar to It, where the whole thing where if you believe it will work, it will. But honestly, I didn't really love it here in Needful Things. And I just, in It, that theme works perfectly. Whereas here, I wasn't as big a fan. And then, also we see later when Alan does go into Needful Things in the book, he sees that there's like layers of dust and that this place has not been in use for years. And so we further realize the way Gaunt has deceived people, not only with the items they purchase, but also all of Needful Things. Whenever they walked in there, they were in like this parallel supernatural universe that didn't even exist because the actual shop is dusty and hasn't been used in ages. And so I get that a person seeing what they want to see and allowing themselves to be tricked and manipulated is a key part of the book. And so I guess with that logic, you can understand why these magic tricks become real when Alan wants to believe they're real. And yet, again, maybe it just felt too similar to It, and I just read It, and so it's fresh in my mind. And so it just felt too much like King was taking a theme from It that worked great in that, and he just tried applying it here as well, and I just didn't like it. But again, comment your thoughts down below. Maybe if you did like this aspect of the book, let me know down in the comments. But to move on to Alan. So he is the town sheriff, and in both he is dating a woman business owner named Polly. And in the movie, we hear how he worked in a big city, but after hurting a man, he left and came to the small town of Castle Rock. And he does see Gaunt early on, and that is how we learn this backstory. However, he doesn't actually buy anything from Gaunt. Whereas in the book, he never interacts with Gaunt at all, because Gaunt purposefully avoids meeting him because he knows that Alan will be on to him. Also, by the way, this book takes place over the course of a week, maybe less. And so it's easy, for Gaunt to avoid meeting the town sheriff since he's not even in town for very long at all. But also in the book, Alan's, the trauma from his past is different from the movie, because in the book, less than 2 years ago, he had a wife and a young son who died in a car crash, and his wife had a brain tumor, which he wasn't aware of. And so they speculate that this brain tumor probably led to the car crash, and also how brain tumor, it affects your sanity. And so you can suddenly just decide to commit suicide and just do it in the blink of an eye because you're not thinking clearly because of the tumor. And so he talks to a doctor being like, would it also make her be okay with having her own son die? Like, could that happen? And the guy is like, yeah, definitely. Like, a lapse of sanity can cause him to do anything, sort of a thing. And so he is haunted and obsessed with wanting to know what their final moments were in that car, and to know like what exactly happened and what caused this accident. Why wasn't she wearing her seatbelt? Like, what was going on here? And so he becomes obsessed with this. And so Gaunt uses this. And in the end, he provides Alan with a videotape that shows the final moments. And in this videotape, it makes it appear that Ace Merrill caused the car accident, because Ace had been mad at Alan for sending him to Shawshank some years prior. And so this is a lie, of course, but Gaunt is doing his thing at turning people against each other. And so because of this, Alan believes it, and he then is leaving the store to go kill Ace when Polly then shows up, and she convinces Alan to, realize that this was just a lie. Ace wasn't actually there, and you will never know what happened to your wife, and it's something you need to let go, essentially. And so in the end of the book, Alan accepts the fact that he will never know what those final moments were for his wife and young son, but he's fine with that. And he puts it at rest, and he's at peace with the fact that he will never know. By the way, in the book, he also has an older son in college. However, this son is mentioned, but we never actually see him because he's away the whole time this story takes place. But this, Alan thinking that he needs to know what happened. This is that quote I mentioned earlier where Polly says, like, he takes a want and convinces you it's a need. And so I like this because I feel like we do have things in life that we feel like we need this, whether it's a thing or information or something, and we convince ourselves that we need this. And yet, I don't know, I guess rethinking things like, do I really need this thing or this information? Maybe it's just a want. And yet I have convinced myself it's a need. And by convincing myself it's a need, I'm just causing more pain in my life in one way or another. Like Alan, he does not need to know the details of his wife's death leading up to those last moments, right? He doesn't need to know that. And yet he was able to convince himself that he did. And it was causing a lot of pain in his life because of that. But to go back to Ace, so again, Gaunt, he was turning Ace against Alan and Alan against Ace. Again, they already had drama and didn't like each other, so Gaunt was just feeding off of what already existed. But Ace Merrill is the same Ace from the book The Body, however, he is now in his late 40s. And so he had not been in Castle Rock when Gaunt showed up, but Gaunt calls him to Castle Rock and gets him to do his bidding. So in the book, Ace and Danforth Keeton are the two helping Gaunt plant explosives and things. But in the movie, it was just Keeton. And Keeton is similar to both book and movie. He is a town selectman who has a gambling addiction, and because of that, he has been taking money from the town funds. And some other government agency person has seen that something weird is going on with Castle Rock's money, and so they have planned an audit to take place soon. And Keeton doesn't have the money to make up for the money that is lost, and so he is in a really stressful position. However, when he goes to Needful Things, Gaunt sells him this racing game that helps him pick winning horses, and so he takes it to the track and he's able to win back a ton of money. However, even with that, Gaunt is still messing with him. And so Keeton just keeps getting crazier and crazier. And in the end, he kills his wife in both book and movie. And this was a brutal scene in the book. And we hear more about his wife in the book. And she also shops at Needful Things and buys a doll. And this doll, she just confides all of her, because she's in a horrible marriage with an abusive man. And so she uses this doll for comfort, and she tells this doll all of her worries. And she was just such a sad figure. And I wanted so badly for her to get away from him in the end. And when he shows up in his car, wanting her to get the screwdriver so he could, undo his wrist from the handle, all of that, I was just like, oh no, get away from this man. I wished she would have killed him or at least just gotten away. And yet instead, the worst case scenario happens. And so this again, the murder of his wife is another example of how King does not pull any punches in this book. He is not holding back. But in the end of the book, so Ace and Keeton are working together, and in the end, they have a standoff with Norris, one of the deputies, and ultimately Keeton is shot right here, and this is how he dies. And then from here, Ace goes to Needful Things, and there is a showdown where Ace is holding Polly hostage, and then Alan is there, and then Gaunt also shows up in this moment. And ultimately, Ace also ends up being killed in the end of the book. Whereas in the movie, Keaton's demise is different because in the end of the movie, the town is there admitting to what Gaunt had them do when Keeton then comes up and he too ends up blaming Gaunt for everything that has happened, including the death of his wife, which yeah, you were under the influence of Gaunt, but don't try to act like you didn't do that yourself. That was on you, buddy. You're the one who killed her. And this also comes up in the book too, and there's a guy who kills a dog. And there's part of him that disassociates and doesn't want to believe that he was the one who did it and maybe tries to convince himself it wasn't him. And yet there's his conscience in the back of his mind being don't fool yourself. You are the one who killed that dog. But yeah, so in the TV show, in the movie, Keeton blames Gaunt for everything, basically, and he has explosives strapped to his chest. And then he tackles Gaunt and they go into a building and it all explodes and Keeton dies. However, Gaunt can't be killed and he comes out of the wreckage and he then he tells Alan, I'll be meeting with your son in years to come, and off he goes. But in the movie, the scene when everyone admits to the pranks they did on others was a little cheesy. Like in the book, we have Norris, the deputy. He feels like he is to blame for everything. And so he confesses how, whatever he did, I think he messed with someone's car. And so he admits, like, I'm the one who did that. I caused the murder. And yet Polly is like, don't put this all on you. Like everybody in this town, nearly everybody in this town did something. Like we are all to blame for the things we did. And so that's like what happens in the book, which was a moment I liked. Whereas in the movie, the fact that they all step forward and they're all admitting the things they did, it was just a little cheesy, I guess. And generally, I don't have anything against Ed Harris, and in Needful Things, he plays Alan. But yeah, I just thought he was overacting in quite a number of scenes, including this one when he's, yelling at the town, like, oh, like, we're good people, blah, 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 Gaunt is ruining us. And there was a scene early on, too, when he's breaking up a fight in the police station. And yeah, it just felt like he was overacting a lot of the time. But to talk about Polly, so she and Alan are our main two characters, along with Gaunt. And in the movie, she owns a cafe, but in the book, it is a sewing store. But in both, she has horrible arthritis, like insanely bad. And so when Gaunt offers her a necklace charm that takes away the pain, she is all in and willing to do whatever it takes to keep the pain away. By the way, having like this necklace charm with like something weird inside was definitely reminding me of Rosemary's Baby. But then something with Polly that is specific to the book is that her background, her past, she had been pregnant when she was in her late teens. And so she goes to California to start life new with her baby. However, when her child is like a couple years old, he dies in an apartment fire. And so she ends up returning to Castle Rock later in life. However, she never tells anyone what happened to her baby, and the whole town gossips and speculates, but none of them know for sure. And even when she dates Alan, she lies and tells him a lie about her baby. And he knows she's not telling the truth, but he doesn't push it. And he's like, she'll tell me what really happened when she's ready. However, Gaunt in the book sends Polly a letter from California, making it seem like Alan has been snooping into her past, trying to find out the truth. And this, of course, really upsets her. And so she calls him up and breaks up with him. Whereas in the movie, Polly does not have this backstory. And the drama between her and Alan happens because Alan knows about Keaton's embezzling because he gets a notice. And so he confronts Keaton about this, and Polly sees the two of them talking. And later when she tries to ask Alan about this, he, is kind of brushing her off. And so she's like, that's weird. And so Gaunt later tricks her into thinking that Alan had also been embezzling and that he was working side by side with Keaton. But in both, she eventually realizes that this was a lie made by Gaunt. And in the book, so she plants evidence against Alan for Ace to find. She doesn't know what it is. Like all of these people doing these pranks, they don't know like what this will lead to or who this is going to turn who against. They just go with it. And so she does something with Ace that will turn him against Alan, unbeknownst to her. But after this, near the end, she finally takes off the necklace and she's just like wants to step away from all of it, and she realizes it's evil. And from the necklace comes out a spider, which continues to just grow and grow and grow because it has been feeding on her soul, essentially. And so she has a battle with this spider, which got pretty gross at times, but ultimately she is able to kill it. And the spider was not in the movie. And in the movie, we get a scene when Gaunt shows up to Polly's house, and their whole interaction right from the start was very sexual. And I was not a fan of this. I found it completely unnecessary. But then I also wanted to talk about how in both we see that the Catholic Church in town is hosting a casino night, and the Baptists are very angry about this. And Gaunt works on this to pit the two religions against each other, and they have this huge battle in the end of the book, which gets insane. Whereas in the movie, the pastor and the priest both buy things from Gaunt, which was not the case in the book. I don't think either of them actually shopped at Needful Things. Some of their congregation members had, but yeah, the two pastors hadn't actually seen Gaunt. But yeah, and so Gaunt becomes involved in that way. And we really just see the two church leaders battling it out rather than seeing their whole congregations going against each other in such a dramatic way like we did in the book. But once Gaunt is gone, those left alive suddenly just stop the violence in the book, and his influence is no longer over them. But something else in the movie that was interesting is partway through, Alan goes to see the priest and he's talking to him about like evil essentially and like what does evil look like. And the priest initially is like, oh, like, providing his answers. But then when Alan brings Gaunt into it, the priest is suddenly angry and he's like, Gaunt is a good man, like, how dare you? And so I did like this too, how, like a pastor is someone who is supposed to be so holy and a source of truth and knowledge, I guess. And so Alan goes to him for advice and maybe words of wisdom. And yet, like on a dime, he turns on him being like, oh, how dare you talk about Gaunt? And so just seeing the hold Gaunt had over him, I did think this was a good scene. And then I also wanted to mention a storyline that is in both book and movie, and that is Nettie Cobb, and she's turned against, I forget the woman's name. There's so many names in this book. But Gaunt, of course, turns her against someone else in town, and they're the first two who die. But in the book, she had this cute little dog that this other lady hated. And so he has a guy kill the dog. Nettie thinks this woman did it. And so the two of them kill each other. But yeah, in the book, it was just like this cute little dog. I forget what breed. But in the movie, they make this a Rottweiler, which the fact that she's upset at this small little dog is so ridiculous in the book. But then in the movie, seeing that it's a Rottweiler, like I'm not against Rottweilers, but they are very threatening looking dogs. So I thought that was an interesting change to have it change the breed in such a drastic way. But in the movie, not only does he kill the dog, he like skins it and hangs it up from a doorway, which was very shocking to see. And so that was like a surprising scene to watch. But also in the book, a lot of animals are killed. So again, King does not hold back at all in this book, and anything or anyone you hope doesn't end up dying, they probably will end up dying, and in a upsetting way. But then there's a few stories I wanted to mention that are not in the movie. First of all, there is a Baptist couple who are dating, and Gaunt convinces both of them that they are cheating on each other, and this leads to both of their death. So the man, he goes to beat up the guy he thinks she is having an affair with, and this leads to his death because he is shot as he is trying to kill this man. And then she, in the end, ends up committing suicide, which I thought was very sad because she feels guilty for like contributing to his death. And then the woman here, before she killed herself, obviously, the prank she had to play was on the school principal because she herself was a teacher. And basically, she finds out that the school principal was a pedophile and he had really upsetting pornographic items in his desk, which she spread around the room so that people would see this. And he also would go to these events with young boys and there were photos taken. And so he is also blackmailed with these photos. And it was another man who worked at the school they were like pedophile buddies together. And so Gaunt turns these two men against each other. And I'll tell you what, these two guys deserved everything that was coming to them. I hoped that they would die horrible deaths because it was just so disturbing. And again, it's one of those things where, this book had a lot of dark humor, but then the fact that this ends up becoming part of the story was just so disgusting. And also the woman, when she finds the magazines, she's not disgusted. She's shocked because the principal doesn't seem like that kind of a person, but she also finds it funny and she's like giggling that he has these photos. But I'm just like, how could you find this funny? Like, if you found this out about someone, a school principal no less, like there is nothing funny or amusing about that at all. Like she should have been severely disturbed, right? And shocked and just upset and angry and grossed out. And yet she's giggling about it. So again, Gaunt was influencing her. So there's that. But also just the way King wrote about these two men, he kind of wrote it in a humorous way. And considering what they were blackmailing each other about, I didn't like that he wrote this in a funny way because, there's a part where one guy, he's going to ambush the other man in his apartment. However, the guy gets tired, so he goes to sleep behind the couch. And then when the other guy comes home, he sits on the couch and he like pushes it back. And it almost causes the guy to die because he's being smashed by the couch, which that whole scene was just so ridiculous. And it was a funny scene, but because it dealt with these two men who were absolutely detestable and disgusting, like everything with them just had a comedic tone to it. And I just don't find this funny at all when it deals with pedophiles, you know, like it's not funny, it's disgusting, and it's really upsetting. And so, yeah, writing humorous things about two men like this, I just thought was in bad taste. But I should say that, you know, these two guys aren't the only guys who have comical moments in their feud, right? And really, every two people who are against each other, they all have a lot of comedic moments in the drama going on. But yeah, ultimately, I just didn't feel like reading about two people like this, especially at the time I'm recording this. This topic has been in the news a lot lately, and so maybe I also just wasn't wanting to read about these two type of people. But anyway, to be fair, I just wanted to say that Stephen King writes comedic moments with all of these characters, and it's not like only this story gets the humor, right? Like there's humor throughout the book. But anyway, and they do both end up dying in the end, so what a relief that they died. They had everything that was coming to them, like I said. Followed closely by Keeton, who I also hated so much. And so again, thankfully he too ends up dying. But when it comes to book versus movie, I know I haven't said much about the movie in this video. And again, I did watch the 3-hour version, so I don't know what the normal one is like. But I can appreciate that they did do their best to stay true to the book. And it is pretty faithful, and they did, you know, keep a lot in there. However, they definitely did hold back, and things did not get nearly as insane as they do in the book. But maybe the version I watched was cleaned up for TV. And having said that, I mean, they do push it. Like I said, the scene with Nettie's dog was worse in the movie, I would say, right? Because in the book, it got stabbed, which was obviously horrible. But yeah, in the movie, it's like this whole display. And yet, yeah, in some ways, they did hold back a tad. But again, there were certain words that were clearly replaced for TV because they couldn't swear on a TV production. And so I know it was cleaned up to some extent, but I don't know if there were scenes that were actually cut for the sake of putting it on TV. But yeah, ultimately, they did a good job at including as much as possible. And I did think the performances were fine. I think fine is a good way to describe this movie all in all, though. Like, it was fine. I never planned to watch it again, but I didn't hate it. It was just fine. Whereas the book, I did like quite a bit, despite some of the things I mentioned. And so I could see myself maybe reading this again, perhaps, and I can understand why so many people love it. I did give it 4 out of 5 stars myself, and so again, I would recommend it, especially if you have read other King works. This one is definitely one worth reading too. And so yeah, the book wins by a long shot on all fronts. I thought the book was just much better, much more engaging. And so, yeah, the book wins. And again, this takes place in Castle Rock. And he does mention a number of other stories that take place in Castle Rock that he had written in the past, including Cujo. And that definitely did make me want to cover Cujo. And so I want to do that at some point in the future. I don't know when, but maybe if enough people comment on this video really wanting Cujo, then I will try to get to it sometime this year before the 2025 comes to an end. So yeah, thank you so much for voting in the poll. Thank you so much for those who have commented in the past requesting needful things. I hope you enjoyed the video now that I have finally talked about this one. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.